Okay, the next thing that we're going to look at is this body, because the body, I'm really not happy with it. It's these shoulders and this sort of chest. The main proportions just don't look natural. And what I will also look at, or what I should always sort of keep in mind, is the fact that we have that skeleton there. Unfortunately, it's changed my draw preferences, so make sure that transparency is set to red, and while I'm at it, I'll make sure that transparency is switched on. So yeah, we have to make sure that we do keep very sort of close eye on the joints, where this mesh is going to bend, where the arm's going to bend, and don't sort of improvise too much, which is unfortunately what has led to some of this sort of these proportions looking quite strange. That's alright, we can do something about that. So with the move brush, we're just making small sort of little taps with the pen, just to sort of almost nudge these things into place. And I'm noticing that this neck comes in quite tight. I'm liking sort of the shoulders a little bit more, so I'll mask these out. And then I'll come in and yeah, there's a muscle that goes along here, which is almost like a hood. Which, when you exaggerate that and bring that out, like, it doesn't quite look like that in real life, but when you when you bring that out in a model, it's more appealing, it's more pleasing to the eye. I'm just going to smooth where it's sort of overlapping the mask there, and we also need to bring out the front of the neck here, particularly where we have this muscle that comes up from behind the ear, or where the ear would be on this character, and down to joining at the collarbone here. So we can sort of have a more sort of swoop from there to there. So yeah, I'm a little bit happier with that neck. We're getting some crease there. I'll just see. Yeah, doesn't look too bad. But I will smooth it out a little. There we go. Now, a Dynamesh is probably a little bit high to be working at this level. The reason for that is that this model is huge, because we brought it in from Maya and we're using Unreal units, and so that's the size of the grid currently. And the size of our Dynamesh actually comes off the grid, and so our Dynamesh is currently set to 16, which, when you're working on like a little polysphere about that big, isn't a lot of resolution at all. But when you're dealing with something that's freaking huge, 16 is a lot of resolution. In fact, if we go to polyframe, you can see that it's actually quite dark, and it slows down quite a bit in polyframe. So yeah, if you're If we were starting this model rather than continuing on from it, what I would probably do is go up to the preferences, and you can actually change your grid size, and I'm not sure what it's under, but you'll be able to find it. And if you change your grid size, that will change your Dynamesh resolution. Your Dynamesh resolution goes off the grid, so it's probably best to get the grid size worked out first. But, you know, we're continuing on, so we'll just have to make do. And these pecs quite quite out of place. I'll actually bring them back a little bit. That's looking better. Ribs. It can be tricky working out where things are. You think that maybe they need to go one way, and then you go the other way and it looks better. And another thing is that this skeleton has got quite a high groin, because these legs are enormous. And so it's a good idea to zoom out when you're messing around with this, just to make sure that the actual rib cage isn't coming down into the hip area. I'll just bring out this whole chest rather than just the pecs. You can see this guy's got a butt right up into the middle of his back, which looks a little bit silly. There we go. Add a little bit more sharpness to those shoulder blades. Okay, this butt just looks terrible. It's very important to give your characters a good butt, and you can quote me on that. Because apart from looking better, a lot of realism comes from that. It's what we recognize as being humanoid creature. So bring that waist in a bit. Now we don't want to over exaggerate. These legs are quite spindly, so we're going to be beefing them up a bit more as well. Yeah, maybe not. Those proportions are slightly better, and I'll be able to come in now and with the clay build-up bring in more of the muscle masses. Just have a look at this shoulder, because it looks like the back of that shoulder muscle is just sneaking out a little bit. We want to keep it fairly even front and back to the shoulder. The reason why I'm bringing this section here in is that if you actually feel your muscle on your shoulder, you can actually feel the bone just under this muscle here, because this is one of the areas where the skin dips in and almost connects to the bone. And another area where that happens is actually on the hip. So I see that these hips are actually quite far out and wide. A good website to look at and remind yourself of this is Anatomy for Sculptors. And they have a Facebook page, and I subscribe to their Facebook page, and it amazes me how much I've learnt just by having these sort of quick reminders that things like a pelvis isn't square, it sort of actually dips back along this sort of angle here, particularly in men. So actually just talking about that website reminded me I need to make that sort of look better. And you can see as soon as I do something like that, it immediately becomes more recognizable. It immediately looks more natural and looks more like it is it's more like an actual creature and not just sort of like some cartoon character. And unfortunately the hips of the UDK skeleton are also very narrow. That's okay, we're getting there, we're getting better and better. You can see that it's this strange sort of idealized character that's like, broad across the top and like very narrow hips and very long legs. So like the evolution of a supermodel. So if you're designing your own skeleton, just even get a reference image of what a real person looks like. And so yeah, we're going to have to come in here and have a look at these fingers because we're getting a little bit of webbing there, which is probably a result of restarting my ZBrush. The Dynamesh settings are going back to normal. So just be aware of that. And now that we're working on a sort of a draconic character, we'll be able to give this guy claws, more sort of scaly hands, and sort of like maybe some little miniature horns or spikes coming out the back of his hand. And so yeah, we have a character whose body is looking dramatically better to what it was sort of at the start of the lesson.